I can still feel everyone's eyes on me, burning into my skin like hot spotlights. Mark Donovan leaned back in his chair at the head of the conference table, his voice sharp enough to slice through the nervous office chatter. If you miss one more day, Mia, don't bother coming back. My throat burned from coughing raw and scratched like I'd swallowed broken glass. The doctor's note trembled in my hand, the official letterhead blurring as my eyes watered. I tried to speak, to explain, to defend myself. He cut me off with a dismissive wave. We need reliability here, not excuses. The laughter that had been drifting in from the hallway died instantly. Every face in the room turned away from mine. I swallowed the humiliation like poison, feeling it settle in my chest. My boss threatened to fire me if I missed one more day. The doctor's note wasn't the only document I submitted. Not even close. My name is Mia Lawson. I'm 29 years old and I've been a customer care coordinator at Falcon Freight for 4 years. 4 years of perfect attendance records, glowing client feedback, and exactly 0 disciplinary actions. I was the person who covered shifts when others called out. I was the one who stayed late to finish backlog without being asked. I'd never been late without a valid reason, never missed a deadline, never talked back to management. I believed that hard work and dedication spoke for themselves. I believed that loyalty would be rewarded, that playing by the rules meant you'd be treated fairly. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed Mark Donovan was a demanding but ultimately fair manager. I was wrong about all of it. And it took getting sick to finally see the truth about the place I'd given 4 years of my life to. The cough started small, almost 3 weeks before that meeting. Just a tickle in my throat during a particularly long customer call. I cleared my throat and kept talking, explaining shipping delays to an irate client while my chest felt tight. By the end of that first day, I was coughing every few minutes. By the end of the week, I was struggling to catch my breath between calls. I told myself it was just a cold, that it would pass if I pushed through. I bought cough drops and kept a water bottle at my desk. I took over-the-counter medicine and pretended I was fine. Because that's what you did at Falcon Freight. You pushed through. You didn't complain. You definitely didn't call in sick unless you were literally dying. Mark had made that culture very clear from the beginning. Weakness is a choice, he'd said during my first week. I'd thought it was motivational. Now I knew it was a warning. 2 weeks before the meeting, my coworker Amanda came to my desk in tears. Her 6-year-old son had a fever and the school called saying she needed to pick him up immediately. She was scheduled for the afternoon shift, covering our busiest hours. I can't find anyone to swap, she said, voice breaking. Mark's going to kill me. I was already feeling terrible, my cough getting worse by the hour. But I looked at her desperate face and heard myself say, I'll cover it. Go get your son. She hugged me so hard I nearly coughed in her face. I worked a double shift that day, my regular morning hours plus her afternoon. By the time I clocked out at 8 p.m. I could barely stand. The next day, Mark praised Amanda publicly for handling a family emergency with professionalism. He never mentioned my name. Not once. I should have known then what kind of person he really was. The collapse happened during another double shift I'd volunteered for. Someone else had called in and Mark sent a group text asking for coverage. Nobody responded. I did, even though my chest felt like it was full of broken glass every time I breathed. Halfway through the afternoon, I stood up to grab a file and the room tilted sideways. The next thing I remembered was waking up on the break room couch with 3 coworkers standing over me and someone from HR holding a cold compress to my forehead. You passed out at your desk, the HR representative said firmly. This isn't optional, Mia. You need to see a doctor. Today. They wouldn't let me finish my shift. They insisted I leave immediately. Someone drove me to an urgent care clinic 3 blocks away. I remember feeling guilty the entire drive, worried about the calls piling up, about letting the team down, about what Mark would say. I was sick enough to collapse and I was still worried about disappointing my boss. The doctor at urgent care took one look at me and ordered a chest x-ray. When the results came back, her expression was serious. Acute bronchitis, she said, writing quickly on a prescription pad. Your lungs are inflamed and you're at risk for pneumonia if you don't rest. She handed me 2 pieces of paper. One was a prescription for antibiotics and cough medicine. The other was a medical note. You need at least 3 full days of complete rest. No work. Your body needs to heal. I stared at the note, feeling an odd mixture of relief and guilt. Relief because I desperately needed to sleep, to stop coughing, to breathe normally again. Guilt because I knew what Mark would say, how he'd react, what it would mean for my standing at work. The guilt won. It always did. I texted Mark from the parking lot. Doctor says bronchitis. Need 3 days off. Have medical note. His response came 5 minutes later. We'll manage. I spent the next 2 days in bed, sleeping more than I'd slept in months. The antibiotics slowly started working, the coughing eased slightly, and I could breathe without my chest screaming. On the second day, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Hey Mia, we're really short-staffed today. You sure you can't come in for a few hours? I stared at the message in disbelief. I had a doctor's note. A medical diagnosis. Prescription medication that made me drowsy. And he was asking me to come in anyway. I wanted to respond with anger, with logic, with the truth about how sick I actually was. Instead, I ignored the message and turned my phone face down on the nightstand. But the guilt settled in my stomach anyway. He was testing me, I realized. Seeing if I'd cave, if I'd put the job before my health like I always had before. This time I didn't. And apparently that was unforgivable. I returned to work on the 4th day, still pale and weak but no longer contagious. My doctor had cleared me to return with the note I carried in my bag like a shield. I walked into the office expecting maybe some concern, perhaps a "glad you're feeling better" from my coworkers. What I got instead was sympathetic looks and uncomfortable silence. Mark didn't acknowledge me at all during the morning. He walked past my desk 3 times without speaking. My coworkers kept glancing at me, then at his office, then quickly looking away. Something had shifted while I was gone. The atmosphere felt heavier, more hostile. At lunch, Amanda pulled me aside in the break room. He's been in a mood since you called out, she whispered. Kept making comments about people who can't handle the pressure and commitment issues. Everyone knew he meant you. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. So that's how it was going to be. Punished for being sick. For following doctor's orders. For having a body that dared to fail. The team meeting happened that afternoon. We gathered in the conference room for what was supposed to be a routine weekly update. Mark started with general announcements, performance metrics, upcoming deadlines. Then his eyes landed on me. Before we wrap up, I want to address something important, he said, his tone shifting to something colder. We've had some attendance issues lately that have impacted team momentum. My stomach dropped. He was talking about me. In front of everyone. When one person isn't here, everyone else has to pick up the slack. It creates inefficiency and resentment. He looked directly at me now. If you miss one more day, Mia, don't bother coming back. The room went completely silent. My face burned with humiliation. The doctor's note in my bag suddenly felt worthless. He just threatened to fire me for being medically excused. In front of my entire team. And nobody said a word to defend me. That was the moment everything changed. That was when shock turned to anger and anger turned to determination. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue in front of the team. Instead, I sat perfectly still, nodded once, and waited for the meeting to end. When it finally did, I walked calmly back to my desk, opened my laptop, and started a new document. Not a resignation letter. Something better. A documentation file. I titled it Workplace Issues Falcon Freight, and saved it to my personal cloud storage. Then I started writing everything down. The date of Mark's threat. The names of everyone present in that meeting. His exact words as close as I could remember them. The context of my illness, the doctor's note, the text message asking me to come in while sick. Every detail time-stamped and precise. I worked on it for 20 minutes, capturing everything while it was fresh in my mind. This was just the beginning. If Mark wanted to play games with my job, I'd make sure I had receipts for every move he made. Over the next week, I started noticing patterns I'd been too loyal or too naive to see before. I paid attention to who came in late and who got called out for it. The pattern was striking and impossible to ignore. Marcus from shipping was late at least twice a week. Mark never said a word. Brian from logistics left early every Friday for personal appointments. Mark called it work-life balance. But when Keisha from my team was 10 minutes late due to a train delay, Mark made a comment in the group chat about professionalism and punctuality. When I'd called in sick with a medical note, I got publicly threatened. When Marcus called in for a hangover, Mark joked about it being a rough Monday. I started keeping a log. Names, dates, times, and Mark's responses to each incident. The spreadsheet grew quickly. The favoritism wasn't subtle once you knew to look for it. And it wasn't random. It followed a very specific pattern based on who Mark considered one of the guys. The photo appeared on Falcon Freight's official Instagram account on a Wednesday afternoon. I was scrolling during my lunch break when I saw it. Mark and 4 employees at an upscale restaurant, drinks on the table, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Team Leadership Lunch, Investing in Our Future." I recognized all 4 employees. Marcus, Brian, 2 other men from different departments. All part of Mark's inner circle. All people who regularly got away with things the rest of us would be written up for. What made my blood boil was the timestamp. The photo was posted at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, during regular office hours, while the rest of us were covering the phones and handling the workload. My coworker Keisha appeared beside my desk looking at my screen. "That's the 3rd time this month," she said quietly. "He calls it professional development. But notice who never gets invited." I took a screenshot and added it to my growing documentation file. Because this wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was proof of a pattern of discrimination. I made my first official move that Friday. I walked into HR carrying my doctor's note in one hand and a printed document in the other. The HR representative, a woman named Patricia, looked up from her computer with a polite smile. "What can I help you with, Mia?" I placed both documents on her desk. "I'm submitting my medical documentation for my recent absence," I said calmly. "And I'm also filing a written report about a concerning interaction with my supervisor." Her smile faded as she picked up the second document. It was 2 pages, single-spaced, detailing Mark's public threat, the context of my medically excused absence, and his request for me to come in while sick. I'd kept the tone professional and factual. No emotion. Just facts. Patricia read it slowly, her expression growing more serious with each paragraph. "This is a formal complaint?" she asked carefully. "It's a documentation of events I believe HR should be aware of," I replied. "I trust you'll handle it appropriately." She nodded. "We'll look into this." I thanked her and left, knowing I'd just lit a fuse. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. That weekend I went through every email I'd ever received from Mark. 4 years of messages searching for ammunition. I found it in an email from 8 months ago. The subject line read "Unacceptable Absence," and the message called me out for being unavailable during critical business hours, on a specific date. I pulled up my calendar for that day and felt my pulse quicken. That was the day I'd been assigned to mandatory sexual harassment training by HR. An all-day session held off-site. I'd been literally required by the company to attend. I had the training certificate in my files to prove it. Mark had reprimanded me for following a direct order from HR. I forwarded the email to my personal account, downloaded the training certificate, and added both to my documentation file with a detailed note explaining the context. This wasn't just about being sick anymore. This was about a pattern of unreasonable management, impossible standards, and deliberate harassment. And I was building an airtight case, one document at a time. My annual performance review was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I walked into Mark's office with a calm expression and a recorder app running on my phone in my pocket. He gestured for me to sit, not looking up from his computer. "Let's make this quick," he said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Overall rating, needs improvement." My eyes scanned the form. Vague criticisms about attendance reliability and team commitment. Nothing specific. Nothing actionable. Nothing provable. I looked up at him and smiled politely. "Could you provide specific examples of where I need to improve? I'd like to create a development plan with measurable goals." His expression flickered just for a second. Uncertainty. Maybe annoyance. "It's all there in the form," he said. "I think it's pretty clear." "I'd really appreciate detailed written feedback," I pressed gently. "Just so I understand exactly what behaviors need to change and how my progress will be measured." He shifted in his chair. "I'll send you a follow-up email." "That would be great," I said, standing. "Thank you for your time." He never sent that email. And that silence became evidence too. The tip came from an unexpected source. Helen, a senior coordinator who'd worked at Falcon Freight for 12 years, stopped by my desk the following week. She spoke quietly, not quite looking at me. Don't know if this matters to you, she said, organizing papers on my desk unnecessarily, but I heard HR requested old attendance records from the past year. Not just yours. The whole department's. She glanced toward Mark's office. They're comparing numbers. That's not normal procedure. She walked away before I could respond. But I understood the message. HR was investigating. My report had triggered something bigger than a single complaint. They were looking for patterns, comparing data, building their own case. Helen's information confirmed that my documentation wasn't just sitting in a file somewhere. It was being taken seriously. I sent her a silent thank you and went back to my work, knowing that patience was my strongest weapon right now. The machinery was in motion. I just needed to stay quiet and let it turn. The company-wide engagement survey arrived in everyone's inbox on a Wednesday morning. Falcon Freight sent these out quarterly, asking employees to rate various aspects of workplace culture, management effectiveness, and job satisfaction. Most people ignored them or filled them out with neutral responses, assuming nothing would change. This time I approached it differently. I answered every question honestly and carefully. When asked about management communication, I rated it poorly and provided specific examples in the comment box. When asked about fair treatment, I explained the attendance double standard I'd observed. When asked if I felt comfortable raising concerns, I detailed the public threat I'd received for being medically excused. I kept everything factual and professional. No anger. No exaggeration. Just truth. 2 days later, Keisha mentioned during lunch that she'd done the same thing. So had Amanda. So had 3 other people from our department. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd been keeping quiet about Mark's behavior. The survey had given everyone a safe, anonymous way to finally speak up. And we all took it. The change in Mark's behavior was subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. He started pacing the office more, checking his phone constantly, snapping at people over minor issues. During a team meeting, someone asked a simple question about protocol and he responded with barely contained irritation. If you'd been paying attention, you'd know the answer. His hands shook slightly when he picked up his coffee. The stress was showing. One afternoon, I saw him emerge from a closed-door meeting with HR looking pale and tight-lipped. He went straight to his office and closed the door. The blinds stayed shut for the rest of the day. Random audit, he told the team the next morning when someone asked about the HR meeting. His smile was forced. Nothing to worry about. Just routine compliance checks. But everyone in that room knew it wasn't routine. HR doesn't conduct random audits that make managers look like they've seen a ghost. Something was happening. Something big. And Mark knew he was at the center of it. The confrontation happened in the break room on a Friday afternoon. I was refilling my water bottle when Mark appeared in the doorway, blocking my exit. We were alone. His expression was hard, angry, controlled. "You think HR's on your side?" he said quietly, voice dripping with contempt. "You think filing complaints makes you untouchable?" I said nothing, just met his eyes steadily. He took a step closer. "Let me explain something to you, Mia. You're replaceable. Everyone here is. HR doesn't care about your hurt feelings or your little documentation project. They care about the bottom line." My hand moved to my pocket, feeling the outline of my phone. The recorder app had been running since I walked into the break room. Old habit now. "You want to know what happens to people who make waves?" he continued. "They get managed out. Quietly. Professionally. And nobody remembers their name 6 months later." I still didn't respond. Just watched him, letting him talk, letting him threaten, letting him dig his own grave one word at a time. Finally he stepped back. "Think about that before your next complaint." He left. I counted to 10, stopped the recording and immediately uploaded it to my cloud storage. Evidence file updated. Case strengthened. Trap sprung. I sent the email to HR on Monday morning. The subject line read, "Per your request, evidence of retaliation and hostile work environment." I attached the audio file from the break room confrontation. I attached my complete documentation spanning 4 years, the attendance double standards spreadsheet, the Instagram screenshots, the email about the training day, my performance review notes, and a timeline of events starting with my illness. The email body was brief and professional. "Patricia, as requested during our initial meeting, I am providing comprehensive documentation of ongoing workplace concerns." The attached audio file from Friday, October 13th, Contains direct threats and retaliation following my formal complaint. Please let me know if you need any clarification or additional information. I hit send at 9:03 a.m. Patricia's read receipt came back at 9:07 a.m. Her response arrived at 9:45 a.m. Received. Thank you for this documentation. We will be in touch shortly. Shortly turned out to be 2 hours. By noon I was called into HR for a formal interview. The investigation had just shifted into high gear. The investigation moved with surprising speed once that audio file landed in HR's inbox. By Wednesday I'd been temporarily reassigned to report to a different supervisor in another department. For the duration of the review process, Patricia explained carefully. This is standard protocol to prevent any perception of retaliation or interference. The reassignment was both a relief and a confirmation. Relief because I no longer had to face Mark every day. Confirmation because HR only takes these steps when they're preparing for serious disciplinary action. The office tension became electric. Everyone knew something was happening but nobody knew exactly what. Mark stopped attending team meetings. His office door stayed closed most of the day. Twice I saw him in heated discussions with people from corporate I didn't recognize. Keisha texted me one evening, "Whatever you did, keep doing it. He's spiraling." I didn't respond. I just waited. Because the truth was, I hadn't done anything except tell the truth and document it. Everything else was just Mark's own actions catching up with him. The final straw came during a department meeting I wasn't even present for. I heard about it from 3 different people, all with slight variations, but the core story was the same. Mark had been presenting quarterly performance metrics when someone asked a question about team turnover rates. It was a fair question. Our department had lost 6 people in 8 months, which was unusually high. Mark's response was to snap. Loudly. In front of 20 people, including 2 HR representatives who'd been sitting in the back of the room. "If people can't handle the expectations, they're free to leave," he'd shouted. "I'm not here to babysit or coddle anyone. This is a professional environment with professional standards." One of the HR reps stood up. "Mark, perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." He turned on her. "I don't need you telling me how to run my department." The room went dead silent. "You don't talk to HR like that. Ever." The meeting ended abruptly. Mark was escorted to a private office. He didn't come back to the floor that day. Or the next. Or ever again. The company-wide memo arrived in everyone's inbox on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. The subject line read, "Leadership Changes Customer Care Department." My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Effective immediately, Mark Donovan is no longer employed by Falcon Freight. This decision follows a comprehensive review of departmental practices and company policy compliance. We take workplace conduct seriously and will not tolerate behavior that violates our values or legal standards. The memo went on to introduce an interim department manager and outlined resources for employees who had concerns about past incidents. It closed with a reminder about the company's commitment to fair treatment and professional conduct. I read it 3 times, then closed my laptop and sat in silence. It was over. Really over. Not just for me but for everyone who'd been quietly suffering under Mark's management. The satisfaction I felt wasn't triumphant or celebratory. It was quieter than that. It was simply the feeling of justice, delayed but delivered. The feeling of standing up and not getting knocked down. The feeling of knowing that documentation, patience and truth had won. Patricia called me into her office 2 days after the memo. Her expression was serious but not unkind. "Mia, we need to talk about your situation." She gestured for me to sit. "First, I want to apologize on behalf of the company. The treatment you experienced was unacceptable and violated multiple company policies." She slid a folder across the desk. "We've completed our review of your case. Your record has been cleared of any negative marks related to your medical leave or performance. You'll receive back pay for any missed wages during the investigation period." I opened the folder. Inside was a formal letter of apology, documentation of my cleared record and something unexpected. An offer letter. "We'd like to offer you a position in our operations division," Patricia continued. "It's a supervisory role with increased responsibility and compensation. You've demonstrated integrity, professionalism and leadership during an extremely difficult situation." I stared at the offer letter, reading the title twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. Team supervisor. The same level Mark had held. I looked up at Patricia. I'd like to accept, I said quietly. Now I stand in my new office, the same glass-walled space that used to belong to Mark Donovan. HR had it completely cleaned and reorganized before I moved in. New furniture. New computer. Fresh start. On the desk sits a folder labeled Leadership Orientation with training materials and team introductions. I look out over the customer care floor watching my new team work. Some of them were my former coworkers. Now they report to me. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Keisha catches my eye through the glass and gives me a small, knowing smile. Amanda waves. Even Helen nods with what looks like approval. This morning I received my first departmental report showing attendance records, performance metrics and team feedback. I read through it carefully, noting patterns and concerns, thinking about how I want to lead differently. How I want to build a culture where being sick doesn't mean being punished, where favoritism doesn't determine success, where documentation isn't necessary because fairness is default. I close the report and whisper to the empty office. Turns out I was never replaceable. But the real truth is simpler than that. I didn't win by being irreplaceable. I won by being willing to document the truth and fight for what was right. And that's a lesson worth remembering.